Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our virtual learning session, which is part of our evaluation of the Dormant Assets Northern Ireland Phase 1 grant programme. I'm Lauren Roberts, I'm a director at SQW, I'm the project director for the evaluation, and I'm joined today by my colleague Jane Meager, who is our project manager. If you want to give everyone a wave, Jane. We are joined today as well by colleagues from our evaluation team, and you may well have spoken to or met some of them along the way. So we've got Bill, Joanne and Luke joining us, and we've also got colleagues from the National Lottery Community Fund. We've got Jenny, Brona, David and Sarah joining us. So thank you for dialing in. This session will run until 1:15. If you need to leave early, that is absolutely fine. Please do so, but we're really hoping you don't need to, because there should be some really interesting discussion today. This session is being recorded. You will receive a copy and a set of these slides afterwards. So if you want to turn off your camera, if you don't want to be filmed, that is absolutely fine. And please do put yourselves on mute if you are not speaking. I'm going to hand over now to Jenny, who's going to say a few words of introduction.
Thanks, Lauren. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome to today's session. I'm Jenny Fitzgerald. I'm a funding manager at the National Lottery Community Fund, and I'm delighted to open this virtual learning event. This session is all about sharing the latest learning from the second interim evaluation of the Dormant Assets Northern Ireland Phase 1 grant programme. We know that this programme has been instrumental in helping organisations like yours build capacity, resilience and sustainability. And today is an opportunity to reflect on what's working, what challenges remain and how we can continue to strengthen the sector. We'll hear from SQW, who have been leading the evaluation, and we'll also have space for you to share your own experience and insights. Your contributions are invaluable, and we really appreciate the time you're taking to be here today. So let's get started, and I'll hand back over to Lauren to take you through the key findings.
Brilliant, thanks Jenny. So I'll give you a quick overview of the plan for today's session. So this session is for grant holders. There will be a presentation by us that will last till about 25 past, but then we will go out into discussion breakout groups. So there will be a chance for you to discuss your own learning and your own experiences with peers. We will then come back together as a whole group for the final sort of 10-15 minutes, and we will hear some feedback from each of the different discussion groups. So don't worry, you will get a flavour of all the things that are discussed, and we will be capturing notes. So as I said at the start, the main session, so this one, is being recorded. However, the breakout groups will not be digitally recorded. We want everybody to feel that they can speak quite freely. We know that some people may have experienced challenges or want to share some of the more sensitive learning. So we will be capturing notes, but we will not be attributing the findings back to individual organisations or people, and we won't be digitally recording those discussion groups. So we would ask that if you want to go away and talk about what you've heard today or what you've discussed, that's brilliant. We want you to share the learning, but please don't attribute anything that you hear in the discussion groups back to any specific individual or organisation. And if you want to pose any questions about what we are talking to you about today, or about the evaluation, or about dormant assets more broadly, please do use the chat function, or feel free to raise those questions in your discussion groups. We won't be attempting to answer those today, mainly because of the interest of time, and also because some questions will be better answered by certain members of the team. So we'll take those away, and we will provide written responses to all questions posed when we circulate the details after today's session. So feel free to raise them, but we will come back to you with responses. So if we move forward to the next one, please. So giving you a quick overview in terms of format. Our presentation now will be a combination of me and Jane. I'll be talking you through what it is that we're trying to do, how we're doing it, what we've got coming up. And Jane will be covering the interesting bits around what are the emerging insights, where is there evidence of outcomes, what is the learning in terms of some of the process learning around the activities implemented. So it's a chance for us to play findings back to you, but then we want it to be over to you, for you to discuss with peers. What difference has the grant made for you? So is your organisation more sustainable or resilient? Have you built capacity as a result of the grant? If so, how? If not, what were some of the challenges experienced? The second element of the discussion is to really try and share some learning around what works in building sustainability, resilience and capacity. So a bit of a sort of appreciative inquiry approach. What aspects of your projects have worked particularly well in that respect? why, how, in what context. So it's really a chance for you to share learning and hear from others about how grant-funded activities have gone. So just to give you a quick overview in terms of the evaluation, and I will say before I say this, a massive thank you to everybody who has contributed to the evaluation. We obviously can't do it without your inputs. We started this work in November 2023. We are from SQW, it's an independent research organisation, and we were commissioned by the National Lottery Community Fund to conduct a process and outcomes evaluation of Dormant Assets Northern Ireland Phase 1 grant programme. So we've conducted that evaluation over 3 phases. We have completed 2 of those phases, and we are literally, as of today, going into phase 3. Those phases were structured based on when organisations either applied for grant funding for those that were unsuccessful in their application or received their award. So far, we have produced 2 interim reports. The second interim report was published only last week on the National Lottery Community Fund website, so please do take a look at that if you haven't seen it already. There is a lot of learning in those reports, and we are only going to scratch the surface today. We certainly won't be covering everything that's in there. We will also be producing a final report, which will be published over the summer. And alongside that, we're producing a series of case studies to provide some contextualised insights at a specific organisation level. We'll also be running a final learning event, and we've done 2 learning events previously, and we'll be producing other dissemination outputs as well. So, for example, we've already produced a blog and an infographic to try and share some of the learning. So one more slide from me in terms of what we've done so far. We started with a scoping phase, conducted a series of stakeholder conversations, looked at the evidence that was already held by the National Lottery Community Fund in terms of documentation and data. And we also conducted a review of the wider evidence base to understand what good practice looks like in terms of building capacity, resilience and sustainability amongst voluntary and community sector organisations. Jane and Luke also attended an in-person event about this time last year to try and meet some of you. And that all informed our work plan. And essentially what we've done over the 2 phases completed so far are a series of online surveys. So we've surveyed grant holders, we've surveyed unsuccessful applicants, and through those surveys, we've recruited for conversations. So we've conducted in-depth conversations with 16 grant holders and 7 unsuccessful applicants. We've triangulated insights from that primary data collection with the existing data and documentation that's held by the National Lottery Community Fund and anything that organisations themselves have been willing to share with us. And we've conducted case study fieldwork focused on 3 specific organisations. So those organisations are Bolster Community, Developing Healthy Communities and Crescent Arts Centre. And you can review those case studies if you want to on the National Lottery Community Fund website, just to get some of those in-depth learnings. Final slide on what we're going to be doing next. We are going into phase 3, as I've just said. This will run through to May. So what we'll be doing is a further wave of surveys. So in terms of the surveys, as I said, thank you to everybody who's already completed a survey. You will be receiving another survey link. If you've not filled one in yet, you'll be getting the overall survey to fill in, which aims to capture what you've been doing in terms of activities and also some of the outcomes emerging and impacts and what you might expect going forward. For those that have already completed a survey, we will be issuing a short follow-up survey, which tries to capture some of those impacts that might be emerging that we maybe haven't heard about yet. Please do take a look at those and complete them if you feel able to. It's massively helpful for us. We will then be conducting a series of conversations with grant holders who sign up during this phase and also some wider stakeholders. Alongside this, we will be getting out and about and visiting 4 organisations to try and develop case studies. So we'll be conducting conversations as part of that process, and then looking to develop those into written case studies that will be published. So alongside all of this, as I've said, we'll be triangulating with existing data held by the National Lottery Community Fund, and we'll be revisiting the wider evidence base. We know that things might have moved on in terms of, there are shifts in the socio-economic context, the political context, things like the end of COVID-19 support funding. So we do need to look at what's going on in the wider evidence base and check that we're up to date in terms of that. And then we will be playing back all of the findings. So there will be the final report that will be published in full and summary format. And over the next few weeks, we will also be recording a podcast to try and share some of that emerging learning so far. There will also be a final learning event, which we expect to take place in person at some point over either June or July. So watch this space in terms of what's happening with that. And I will now hand over to Jane, who's going to talk you through the interesting bit in terms of what's actually emerging.
Thanks, Lauren. Yeah, so I'm going to present some of the key learnings from our second interim evaluation report, starting with approaches taken by grant holders to support capacity, sustainability and resilience. So grant holders we spoke with tended to take approaches which supported them to improve their capacity, sustainability and resilience across 5 main thematic areas. So the delivery of effective project planning processes, developing leadership and management capabilities, relationship building and partnership working, investment in skills and training, and then also the building of unrestricted funds. So these 5 themes nicely align with 5 of the 6 themes of effective practice we identified in the review of the wider evidence that Lauren has just touched on, which we developed last year. But at this interim stage, the one theme of effective practice we've not really seen much of from grant holders is measuring and evidencing impact or social value. So I'm really keen to hear any of the examples of this when we go into our breakout groups later on. But the 5 broad approaches outlined there tended to be effective in supporting grant holders' capacity, sustainability and resilience. I'm just going to run through each one in turn, drawing on examples from case study organisations where relevant. So firstly, approaches to deliver effective project planning processes. So some of these might sound really obvious to you, but they really have provided a bedrock to project success. And where these things haven't been in place, it has proven a bit of a barrier to project delivery and a barrier to outcomes realisation as well for grant holders. So things like setting clear and achievable aims and outcomes, considering timelines for both project implementation and then timelines to realise outcomes as well. So that development of a realistic timeline with some flex is really important. And then linked to this, embedding sustainability planning from the beginning of the project, just to ensure there's adequate time and flex for project activities to be delivered and where appropriate, sustained. And then maintaining a flexible approach to delivery to mitigate emerging challenges or to take advice from experts you might be consulting with, aligning project activities to organisational strategic priorities, which we heard can better support embedding of activity and organisational buy-in. And then finally, embedding activities to support resilience, capacity, sustainability into organisational plans, like kind of high-level strategic plans or things like marketing and comms plans. The second theme around developing leadership and management capabilities. So there's a really nice example of this from one of our case studies, developing healthy communities. So they used the grant funding to fund an operations manager post. And while in post, the ops manager implemented a kind of whole set of new structures and processes for the organisation, including training and development plans, which also covered leadership and management staff to get qualifications. So, for example, one senior staff member at the organisation gained an ILM level 5 qualification, and this was said to have improved their leadership skills and developed their strategic thinking. And then more broadly, at developing healthy communities, the new structures and processes that the ops manager had put in place really ensured that the right conditions were in place within the organisation for those new knowledge and skills and capabilities developed by senior staff could be put into practice. So things like policies protecting kind of broader staff time so they can implement any changes. And then training and development plans were also said to have generated a continuous learning culture across the organisation where all staff, including those who are potential future leaders, could pursue training opportunities relevant to their role. The third theme is focused on relationship building and partnership working approaches. So there were 2 main ways of doing this, which were taught about by grant holders. So first with stakeholders from other sectors, and then also with other VCSE sector organisations. So for example, on the first, Bolster Community, who were another one of our case study organisations, they collaborated with Southern Health and Social Care Trust And Bolster were supported by a retail consultant who was funded through the Dormant Assets grant to develop the Bolster Buddies programme, which essentially paired young people with a support worker to make candles to sell. And this service generated a new income stream for Bolster, as well as the kind of obvious benefits there for young people. And then in relation to working with other VCSE sector organisations, so back to developing healthy communities through the Ops Manager post. So they managed to secure funding for an Ideas Fund partnership, which explicitly supported engagement with VCSE organisations like the Northwest Community Network and other organisations as well, like Ulster University. And this programme aimed to foster partnerships between community groups and academia. And this has enabled developing healthy communities to share knowledge with other VCSE organisations and has brought mutual benefits as well, not least getting and achieving the grant funding. Just to point on this, we didn't hear much at all about successful approaches to working with private sector organisations. This seemed to be more of a challenge for the organisations we've spoken with so far. So again, really interested to hear if anyone has any positive experience or successful approaches that they've taken of working with private sector organisations when we go into the breakout groups. The fourth theme is around investment in skills and training, and there were three different approaches to this broadly. So first of all, bringing in required skills to support delivery, which was through commissioning consultants to provide expert advice or support, or recruiting staff with specialist skills. Secondly, involving existing staff in delivering project activities to support buy-in and engagement, and also supporting upskilling. So for example, our third case study organisation, Crescent Art Centre, they got their staff really involved in the product development process for its new retail display, which was said to have supported staff commitment to what was really a new venture for the organisation. And then thirdly, increasing internal resource to deliver projects, so training or upskilling staff to build their capacity to deliver activities. And this was said by grant holders to often be a better approach than recruiting new staff. And then the final theme or approach is around building unrestricted funds. So seen through two ways. So first, obviously, income generation, but then the second around reducing costs and increasing efficiencies within the organisation that way. They had lots of examples of the former, of projects which had successfully generated income using the grant funding, particularly through new products or service sales, like the example of Crescent I just talked about with their new retail display, and Bolster with their Bolster Buddies service. But then we also had interesting examples of cost reduction activities. So for example, one grant holder we spoke with used the Dormant Assets funding to fund a business development manager post who essentially reviewed the organisation's supplier base, identified opportunities for savings, and then also introduced more effective accounting processes to increase financial transparency to kind of support opportunities to be spot for savings in future. I won't dwell too long on this, but these approaches that I've just run through have resulted in outcomes and impacts for grant-funded organisations. So in terms of outcomes, we've seen organisations, or we've heard about organisations developing new ways of working. They reported greater staff knowledge, skills and confidence. We've seen examples of income streams being generated. We've seen examples of efficiencies created as a result of new systems, structures and processes. And then some evidence of organisations being better able to use data as well to demonstrate their social value to funders. And in the report, there's lots of examples, and it goes into a little bit more detail. But I just wanted to focus on some of those impacts. So as a result of these approaches and these outcomes being achieved, grant holders we spoke with reported improvements in sustainability, particularly through the improvement of internal processes, increased focus on long-term strategic planning, And this was sometimes driven by the recruitment of new staff with particular expertise. And these roles didn't necessarily have to be sustained themselves for a legacy to be left in terms of sustainability. But it's quite unclear at this interim stage whether organisations who did recruit new staff to support grant-funded activities will have the kind of longer-term capacity for strategic and long-term thinking once the post ends, if the end of the post wasn't fully planned for. Also heard about organisations becoming more resilient as a result of the grant funding. So predominantly through increased financial resilience, so through increasing that unrestricted income, but in other ways as well, like improved networks and new relationships leading to kind of increased social capital. And then we also heard about improved capacity or improvements in capacity. So particularly in the short to medium term, through things like streamlining systems and processes and through developing staff skills and knowledge as well. And then really positively, most grant holders that we spoke with at this kind of second interim stage said that they felt that the dormant assets funding had resulted in transformative change for their organisation. So for example, one grant holder described themselves as a different charity as a result of the project that they delivered, although very conscious that there were reflections from grant holders that this transformative change does take time to realise. And on that note, I'll hand back over to Lauren just to reflect on some of these themes.
Thanks, Jane. So if we move forward, when we were looking at the range of issues that organisations were trying to tackle through applying for the grant, organisations were trying to tackle, we've put on here financial-based issues, but I think more broadly resource-based issues, to do with finances, but also to do with staffing and capacity. And this was all underpinned by a sense of having to firefight. There were a whole range of different, this, challenging contextual factors going on in terms of cost of living crisis, the end of COVID-19, pandemic-related support, the political climate, some real challenges. And organisations were aligning their ask through the fund with those broader contextual challenges that they were experiencing. And the activities delivered by successful grant applicants really did align with the challenges that were identified. And something that I think is really interesting, Jane's talked about an increase in unrestricted and diversified income sources. We really saw an increase in those types of activities being delivered, organisations really seeking to diversify their income sources and generate more unrestricted income in wave 2, so later applicants and grant recipients than we saw amongst those earlier applicants. We don't know why that might be. It might be to do with the communications materials issued by the National Lottery Community Fund. It might be due to shifts in the broader landscape, but that's something that really struck us, and we have got some really interesting insights around that. And the activities undertaken, not only did they align with the challenges that organisations were reporting experiencing, but they also aligned with the wider evidence base. That said, Jane's talked you through that alignment, what we were seeing. We saw far less evidence on organisations seeking to demonstrate their social impact and social value measurement. So we're really interested in examples of that. If you've got any, please do raise them in the discussion groups. And we also saw far less than we might have expected in terms of organisations focusing on volunteer development. So recruiting more volunteers or seeking to develop the skills or knowledge or capacity of their existing volunteer base. So again, any examples around that would be really interesting. We did hear quite a lot around bringing in new staff members. We heard some of the challenges associated with that in terms of recruitment and ensuring the right fit. But we know that bringing in new staff members can prove really effective. But we also know that actually training existing staff members can also be really effective and potentially offer a more sustainable route to building capacity within the organisation. So final slide, and then we will stop presenting findings. In terms of the outcomes achieved, Jane's final slide there, I think was really important. There, we have seen quite a lot of outcomes evidence emerging. We've seen evidence of new ways of working being developed and embedded, improved staff knowledge, skills and confidence, including indirect generation of that particular outcome. So it wasn't always that organisations sought to develop staff knowledge, skills, confidence, but that it happened through engagement in other funded activities. And we also saw the generation of new income streams. And for some organisations, that was quite significant. So I think one of our case study organisations went from having something like 30% unrestricted funds up to something like 68% as a result of their grant-funded project activity. So really interesting insights. We have also seen evidence of progress towards an achievement of the anticipated programme impacts. So the programme was seeking to improve sustainability, and we have seen evidence around that, particularly through improvements in internal processes and efficiencies. We have seen evidence around increased resilience through that unrestricted income increase that I talked about, but also through leveraging their social value and also engaging and working collaboratively with other organisations. That's proved really important. And again, we're interested in further examples around that collaboration. And finally, we have seen evidence of impacts in terms of increased capacity through streamlining systems, processes, introduction of things like CRM systems, digitisation, really freeing up staff resource, and also the recruitment and development of staff. Now, these outcomes and impacts were attributed to grant funding, and the evidence we got from unsuccessful applicants really does help to paint the picture in terms of attribution that actually is the grant funding that has made a difference. And there are further outcomes and impacts anticipated over the longer term. And we really do want to capture some of those with that follow-up survey we'll be issuing shortly. But finally, I've maybe structured this badly because I don't want to end on a negative, but we have heard some challenges around sustainability. So sustaining some of those outcomes, some of those early indications of progress, particularly where new staff members were funded through the grant, actually making sure that those functions can be sustained and the capacity that they've introduced can be sustained in some format, or the benefits sustained longer term. So again, we're really interested in understanding that as well. So we will stop now with the presentation. There's quite a lot there and we've run through it reasonably quickly. So we want to give you time to reflect on it and talk it through in small groups. So we will